As the sun climbed above the Red Sea coast and spilled golden light across rocky hills and busy harbors, the Kingdom of Axum slowly revealed itself as a place where Africa, Arabia, and the wider ancient world seemed to meet, trade stories, exchange goods, and argue politely over who had the best spices, strongest ships, or most impressive stone monuments. Long before travelers ever reached Axum's capital city, they would hear tales carried by sailors and merchants describing towering stone pillars, bustling markets filled with foreign languages, and rulers so wealthy that their coins traveled farther than many people ever could, slipping from hand to hand across deserts, seas, and distant empires. The land itself felt dramatic and purposeful, with high plateaus rising like natural fortresses above fertile valleys, while rivers and seasonal rains quietly supported farmers who grew grain, raised cattle, and supplied the food that allowed cities, armies, and long-distance trade to flourish together. At the heart of the kingdom stood the city of Axum, where wide streets, stone buildings, and royal compounds reflected careful planning, steady labor, and generations of builders who understood that power could be shown not only through armies, but also through architecture that refused to be ignored. One of the first sights to capture any visitor's attention would have been the towering, steely, enormous stone monuments carved from single pieces of rock, rising into the sky like frozen giants and silently announcing that Axum's rulers expected to be remembered long after their own footsteps faded from the earth. These stelae were not placed casually because each one marked royal tombs or important ceremonial spaces, and their carefully carved doors and windows, though purely decorative, hinted at homes for the dead that mirrored the grandeur of palaces for the living. Around these monuments, daily life continued with surprising energy as traders negotiated prices, children ran through open spaces chasing one another, and officials moved with practiced confidence, all while the stelae stood quietly, watching centuries pass without ever blinking. Axum's power did not come from stone alone, because its true strength flowed through trade routes that connected the African interior to the Red Sea, Arabia, India, and even a Roman world, turning the kingdom into a vital link in a massive ancient network of exchange. Merchants arrived with ivory, gold, animal skins, and exotic animals from deep within Africa, while ships brought silk, glassware, metal goods, and spices from distant lands whose names sounded mysterious and exciting to local ears. The ports under Axumite control buzzed with activity as dockworkers unloaded cargo, scribes recorded transactions, and sailors told exaggerated stories about storms, sea monsters, and impossible adventures that always seemed to grow more dramatic with each retelling. Because trade brought wealth, and wealth demanded organization, Axum developed a strong system of rulers and officials who collected taxes, protected routes, and ensured that caravans and ships could move safely under the kingdom's watchful eye. Axumite kings understood that showing authority mattered, which is why they minted their own coins, often stamped with royal images and symbols that proudly declared who ruled and why their power deserved respect. These coins were more than money because they acted like tiny messengers carrying Axum's name and influence far beyond its borders, quietly reminding foreign traders and rulers that this African kingdom stood confidently among the great powers of the ancient world. Religion also played a central role in Axum's story, shifting and evolving over time as beliefs blended, transformed, and responded to changing political and cultural connections. In its earlier days, Axumite religion included gods connected to nature, fertility, and royal power, reflecting older African traditions and local spiritual practices that tied people closely to land, sky, and seasonal rhythms. Temples and sacred spaces served as gathering points for rituals, offerings, and celebrations where priests, rulers, and communities worked together to maintain balance between the human world and the divine forces they believed shaped their lives. As Axum's connections with the wider world deepened, new religious ideas arrived along the same routes as trade goods carried by merchants, travelers, and missionaries who spoke of distant lands and unfamiliar beliefs. One of the most important changes came when Christianity reached Axum, gradually gaining royal support and eventually becoming deeply woven into the kingdom's identity, laws, and traditions. According to tradition, King Azana played a key role in this transformation, adopting Christianity and encouraging its spread, which marked Axum as one of the earliest Christian kingdoms in the world. This religious shift did not erase older traditions overnight because beliefs often overlapped, blended, and adapted, creating a spiritual landscape that reflected both continuity and change. Churches began to rise alongside older sacred spaces, built from stone and decorated with symbols that told new stories while still fitting into Axum's long architectural tradition. Christianity also influenced Axum's writing, art, and diplomacy, connecting the kingdom more closely with other Christian communities across the Mediterranean and Near East. Axumite scribes used the Ge'ez script to record laws, royal achievements, and religious texts, preserving language and knowledge in ways that still echo in Ethiopian culture today. Education, though limited to certain groups, supported administration and religious life, ensuring that rulers could govern effectively and priests could interpret sacred teachings accurately. Axum's armies played their part as well, protecting borders, asserting control over trade routes, and reminding neighboring regions that the kingdom was prepared to defend its interests when necessary. Soldiers trained with discipline, equipped with weapons suited to varied landscapes, from highlands to coastal plains, allowing Axum to project power across a wide and challenging territory. Yet military strength alone did not define Axum because diplomacy often proved just as valuable, with rulers maintaining relationships through marriage, treaties, and carefully chosen alliances. Foreign envoys visiting Axum would have encountered a court that balanced formality with confidence, displaying wealth and order without needing excessive displays of aggression. Daily life for ordinary people continued alongside these grand political and religious developments, shaped by farming, craftwork, family traditions, and community celebrations that gave meaning to everyday existence. Farmers worked fields with tools refined over generations, adapting to climate and terrain while producing the surplus that sustained cities and trade networks. Artisans crafted pottery, metal objects, textiles, and jewelry, blending local styles with influences absorbed from foreign contacts, creating objects that told stories of cultural exchange without using words. Families gathered in homes built from stone or mud brick, sharing meals, stories, and responsibilities, passing down skills and values that anchored society through periods of change. Festivals brought people together with music, food, and ritual, offering moments of joy, reflection, and shared identity that strengthened community bonds. As centuries passed, Axum's fortunes shifted, influenced by environmental changes, shifting trade routes, and the rise of new powers in surrounding regions. The Red Sea trade, once a steady source of wealth, became more competitive, while political changes elsewhere altered long-established economic patterns. Despite these challenges, Axum's cultural and religious legacy endured, carried forward through traditions, texts, and institutions that survived long after the kingdom's political power faded. The influence of Axum can still be felt today in Ethiopia and beyond, where language, faith, and historical memory connect modern communities to this ancient kingdom. When historians look back at Axum, they do not see a forgotten corner of the ancient world, but a dynamic, confident civilization that shaped and responded to global connections long before globalization had a name. Axum's story reminds us that ancient Africa was deeply involved in world history, contributing ideas, goods, and beliefs that traveled far beyond its borders. Through stone monuments, coins, churches, and stories preserved across generations, Axum continues to speak, inviting new audiences to listen carefully. Its legacy challenges simple maps of ancient power, showing that greatness was not limited to one continent or culture. Instead, Axum stands as proof that history is richest where worlds meet, exchange, and grow together. As we prepare to explore how Axum's influence echoed across regions and centuries, the foundations laid by its people, rulers, and traders remain firmly in place, ready to support the next chapter of this remarkable story. As Axum continued to grow and adapt, the city and countryside together formed a living system where political power, religious belief, trade ambition, and ordinary daily routines constantly influenced one another, creating a rhythm of life that felt steady yet responsive to distant events happening far beyond the horizon. From the royal court, decisions flowed outward like ripples in water, shaping how taxes were gathered, how roads were maintained, and how distant governors balanced local customs with the expectations of kings who understood that unity mattered more than absolute control. Officials traveled between regions carrying orders, gifts, and news, And as they moved across plateaus and valleys, they also carried stories, rumors, and opinions, which meant information in Axum was never frozen, but always shifting and alive. Trade remained the kingdom's heartbeat because even when harvests were uncertain or borders felt tense, ships still sailed, caravans still crossed deserts, and merchants still believed that somewhere ahead waited profit, partnership, or at least a good story worth telling later. Axumite ports along the Red Sea acted like busy doorways, opening the kingdom to the wider world while also filtering what entered, whether goods, ideas, or people who arrived curious, hopeful, or slightly nervous about local rules. Sailors learned quickly that Axumite officials took measurement and record-keeping seriously because weights, scales, and written accounts helped prevent arguments from turning into grudges, which could easily damage long-term trade relationships. In marketplaces, conversations mixed practical matters with playful competition as traders compared whose homeland produced better incense, stronger wine, or more impressive temples, often exaggerating just enough to entertain without starting trouble. Children growing up in Axum absorbed these scenes naturally, learning geography not from maps, but from overheard conversations that mentioned distant ports, foreign kings, and oceans they might never see but could easily imagine. Education for elites focused on reading, writing, calculation, and religious knowledge, preparing future administrators and priests who needed sharp minds more than strong arms, though many probably wished for both when challenges arose. The Ge'ez language and script became tools of memory, allowing laws, prayers, and rail announcements to survive longer than voices alone, which helped Axum project authority across time as well as space. Royal inscriptions carved into stone did more than praise kings because they explained victories, celebrated divine favor, and warned rivals that Axum paid close attention to how it was perceived. Coins continued to evolve in design, sometimes adding Christian symbols that quietly announced changing beliefs while still serving the practical purpose of making trade smoother and more trustworthy. When Christianity became firmly established, Axum did not isolate itself, but instead joined wider conversations about faith doctrine and identity that linked the kingdom to distant communities it would never rule yet deeply understood. Church leaders gained influence alongside royal officials, and while their responsibilities differed, both groups shared the challenge of guiding people through change without tearing society apart. Religious festivals brought crowds together, filling streets with music, movement, and color, while reinforcing shared values that helped bridge differences between social classes and regions. At the same time, older customs quietly persisted in family traditions, seasonal celebrations, and local rituals, proving that belief systems rarely replace one another completely but instead layer over time. In rural areas, life followed agricultural cycles that felt ancient even then, as farmers watched skies for rain, managed soil carefully, and depended on collective effort to survive difficult seasons. Villages maintained strong communal bonds because neighbors relied on one another for labor, protection, and shared knowledge about land that could be generous one year and stubbornly uncooperative the next. Craft production connected countryside and city, as raw materials moved inward and finished goods moved outward, linking people who might never meet but depended deeply on one another's skills. Metalworkers, stone carvers, and potters gained respect not only for talent but for reliability, since broken tools or delayed orders could ripple outward and disrupt larger systems. Axum's military presence, though not always visible, shaped daily life by maintaining order along roads and borders, ensuring that merchants and farmers could plan for the future with some confidence. Commanders understood terrain intimately, using highlands, passes, and river valleys strategically, which allowed smaller forces to defend large areas effectively. Diplomacy often prevented conflict before it began, as envoys exchanged gifts, negotiated terms, and read subtle signals that mattered as much as spoken words. Foreign visitors sometimes misjudged Axum, expecting either overwhelming force or simple hospitality, and discovering instead a careful balance of pride, patience, and expectation of respect. Royal ceremonies reinforced hierarchy without constant violence, reminding everyone where authority rested while still allowing space for cooperation and loyalty. Over time, however, environmental pressures began to complicate life, as changes in rainfall patterns and soil fertility demanded adaptation from farmers and planners alike. trade routes gradually shifted, influenced by political changes elsewhere, forcing Axum to compete harder for influence and relevance in a world that never stayed still. New powers rose in neighboring regions, each with ambitions that challenged older balances, requiring Axumite rulers to rethink strategies that had once worked effortlessly. Despite these pressures, the kingdom's institutions proved resilient, drawing strength from shared identity, faith, and long-established habits of organization. Cultural memory played a powerful role because stories of past greatness encouraged perseverance even when circumstances became less favorable. Monuments remained standing, not only as reminders of former wealth, but as symbols of continuity that connected present struggles to earlier achievements. Christian institutions helped preserve learning during uncertain times, copying texts, maintaining rituals, and reinforcing networks that extended beyond political borders. Even as central authority weakened, local communities retained traditions shaped during Axum's height, ensuring that its influence did not simply vanish. The kingdom's decline was gradual rather than dramatic, unfolding over generations as adjustments replaced expansion and survival replaced ambition. Historians later struggled to define exactly when Axum ended because its legacy blended seamlessly into the cultures that followed. Language, faith, and social structures carried Axumite influence forward, reshaped but recognizable to careful observers. In this way, Axum avoided the fate of sudden disappearance, instead transforming quietly into something new. Modern Ethiopia preserves these connections through religious practice, historical memory, and linguistic heritage that trace lines back to ancient times. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal details about daily life, trade, and belief, filling gaps left by incomplete written records. Each artifact adds texture to the story, reminding us that history is built from ordinary actions repeated across generations. Axum's position between worlds allowed it to serve as translator as well as participant, interpreting ideas while contributing its own. This role required flexibility, curiosity, and confidence, qualities that defined Axum at its best. For children imagining this world today, Axum offers a reminder that Africa was not isolated but deeply connected and influential. Its story challenges narrow views of ancient history that focus on only a few regions. Instead, Axum demonstrates how power, culture, and belief can flourish where paths cross. The kingdom's achievements were not accidents, but results of choices made repeatedly over time. Those choices balanced openness with control, tradition with adaptation, and ambition with stability. As we follow Axum's story forward in time, these patterns help explain both its rise and transformation. They also reveal how societies manage success without becoming trapped by it. Axum's people lived within a world larger than their borders, aware of distant forces shaping local realities. This awareness encouraged engagement rather than retreat. Through trade, faith, and governance, Axum maintained relevance longer than many contemporaries. Its influence extended beyond political boundaries into cultural imagination. Stories of Axum traveled alongside goods, shaping how others understood Africa. Even centuries later, these impressions lingered in maps, texts, and traditions. Axum's legacy therefore belongs not only to one nation, but to global history. It stands as evidence that connection drives creativity and resilience. When young readers encounter Axum, they encounter a world that feels familiar in its complexity. Like today's societies, Axum balanced local needs with global ties. Its successes and struggles feel surprisingly modern. That familiarity invites curiosity rather than distance. By exploring Axum, we learn that ancient history is not silent or remote. It speaks clearly when we listen closely. Axum's voice reminds us that greatness can emerge in many places. It also reminds us that lasting influence often depends on cooperation as much as conquest. As this chapter closes, Axum remains standing in memory, not as a forgotten kingdom, but as a bridge between worlds whose echoes still shape how history is told.